So we are reading Hands of Light by Barbara Brennan. We are in chapter 27, page number 275 of the book and page number 286 of the PDF.
Divine will. After 2 years of concentrating mostly on living by the truth as much as possible, I realized I was having trouble with my will. The way I used my will was creating problems in my life. It was unsteady. I would change my decision about things. I found many levels of wanting or will issues inside.
Now, this is very, very important. This is really something that we must all pay attention to. When we start going into these expanded states of consciousness, that ability to do tathastu starts to come in. So whatever you wish can start to manifest, right? So you have to be very careful about what you're wishing for. The other thing is that your wish or your will has to be like a laser beam. If you are wishing opposite things, then they cancel each other out, right? So focused will becomes extremely important. You have to go, I mean, those of you who've done the gateway voyage, a beautiful way to do it, and those of you who've done excursion, you can do it in F12 also. You go into F15 or into F21 and just set an intent over there and let it be. And then you let go and you start doing whatever shows up in your life. You will find that whatever you want to manifest, right, what you have set that intent over there will start to manifest in your life. The problem is when we let the small guy, the ego, come into play and not allow the divine will to work. You want to work with your will. That is where the problem starts to happen. Okay, so the more you allow things to happen in your life, the better it is. And also you cannot have mixed kind of intents. Your intent has to be clear. So you have to have clarity of intent.
All of us have these. They are from the defended self and are often found in the will of the inner child, the teenager, or the young adult. Most of these wills are rather demanding. Our wills need to grow up. Deep inside of us, there exists a spark of the divine will, God's will.
Now, again, this is important. That's why connecting with that deeper state of our own consciousness becomes so important, right? If you're looking from the will of a child, what will a child want? Suppose you give a child 2000 rupees note and a sweet, the child will go for a sweet. Why? Because it doesn't understand the value of that 2000 rupee note, right? Likewise, a teenager will go for X thing and not for a higher thing, which is a more evolved thing, right? As an adult, again, you're going to look for something else. But when you connect to that deeper state of your own consciousness, what is important starts to shift. You can really start to understand what is it that is really important in your life and not the mundane things which we feel when we are younger that they are important. So we have to grow up with our will, with our desires. We have to actually grow up.
Many people experience divine will as outside of themselves. This means they must always find someone else to tell them what to do.
Now, this is again very important, right? Now, again, the deepest connection can come when you connect with your own self, your own deeper self, and understand what the divine will is from inside yourself. Many times people get dependent on a guru. They will say that only what the guru says is the divine will. Now that makes you feel incompetent. It makes you feel as if you do not have any power with yourself. You do not have that deeper connection with yourself. I'll share an example with you. I think I've shared it before also. There was this one workshop in which these four Swaminis, people who had dedicated themselves to this ashram, they attended the workshop. Now, in the second day of the excursion workshop, we have that one breath technique where you're asking questions and getting answers for yourself. These four people got really upset and they started telling us that how can We get answers for ourselves. The only person who can give answers to us is our guru. Now, what is that? Is the guru making them powerful or powerless? Right? So this is a question that we need to ask ourselves. Are we constantly looking for answers outside, or are we connecting to that deeper state of our own consciousness from which we can get answers for ourselves? And as far as awareness is concerned, the game is of self-empowerment, of empowering everyone, right? So we need to connect with ourselves to get our own answers.
This leads to a feeling of worthlessness. I have found that a spark of divine will exist within every human being. It is essential that you allow yourself time to search for it inside yourself until you find it. It is there. You are not the exception. What does it mean to follow God's will anyway? It certainly doesn't mean to follow God's will as defined by an outer authority.
So correct, right? So someone is declaring that I am connected with God and whatever I say is the will of God. All bunkum in my view, right? We have to find that spark. We have to find that inner connect, which allows us to get into the flow very easily and gently, with love, with compassion, with gentleness, not with aggression.
I decided to find out. I realized that I needed to align all the little wills inside with the spark of divine will inside. I decided the best way to do this for me was to develop a positive use of my will by committing it to a daily practice.
So what does this imply, right? You have to put a focus on something. I think the best way to do it is to focus on the grid. Which side of the grid are we operating from? If we can start operating from the right side of the grid, believe me, it will make life much easier. We will connect with that divine will very easily, because whenever we are operating from the right side of the grid, we are more holistic. We are all encompassing. We are doing things for others rather than only for ourselves, right? Automatically, you will connect into that state of consciousness. This is my thinking. It's my view. Of course, you have to work it for yourselves.
I found a beautiful commitment from the guide lectures coming through the channel of Eva Piraco's 1957 to 80, upon which the pathwork is based. It stated, I commit myself to the will of God. I give my heart and soul to God. I deserve the best in life. I serve the best cause in life. I am a divine manifestation of God.
So, right. So, basically, the prayer can also be, give me the strength to follow thy will. Okay. And of course, over here, they are adding that also provide me with abundance. Basically, the best in life would mean abundance.
Each day, several times a day, I made this commitment. I did this every day for 2 years until it became apparent to me that I was pretty good at finding the divine will inside. Emmanuel said, your will and God's will are the same. When something brings you joy and fulfillment, it is the will of God speaking through your own heart.
So anything that lifts you up, right, that pulls you up, that makes you happy, right, it makes you feel that you're in the flow, is divine will. And this can always happen when you're on the right side of the grid.
Examine your use of will. How much do you should yourself according to an external set of morals? How often do you listen and follow your heart? As you align yourself with your divine will, you may find it is time to concentrate on loving as I did.
So, right. So if I'm operating out of love, I'm automatically operating from the right side of the grid. And if I'm operating from the right side of the grid, I automatically am aligned. I'm in the flow, right? And when you're in the flow, should not, all these factors, can't, won't, all these things automatically drop away, right? You just get into the flow, whatever comes in, you simply do it. And you'll find that you will achieve what you really want to achieve.
Love. Many of us have a very narrow view of what love is. As I spent the next 2 years concentrating on giving love in whatever way I could, in whatever way it was needed, I found many forms of love, all of them saying, I care for your well being in any way I can. I honor your soul and respect your light. I support and trust your integrity and light as a fellow traveler along the way of life. You begin to learn that giving is receiving, is giving is receiving.
So again, when we start operating out of love, we give freely and we receive freely. There is no karma created, right? You're giving out of an expanded state. You're giving it freely. There's no agenda behind your giving, and there is no agenda behind your receiving, right? That's when you get into the flow.
The hardest is to learn self love. If you do not infuse yourself with love, how can you give it to others? Self love takes practice. We all need it. Self love comes from living in ways that do not betray yourself. It comes by living by your truth.
So this is extremely important, right? Instead of loving ourselves, most of the time we are all criticizing ourselves. And that's the worst thing that you can do. So the first thing you need to observe is how critical of your own actions you are. And then start caring and loving for yourself. I don't mean in a negative way, but be expansive, be gentle, be caring for yourself, right? It doesn't mean that you become a lazy Baba, but you need to be doing what you're doing, but in a gentle, loving, and a caring way.
Self love needs to be practiced. Here are a couple of simple exercises that will challenge you. Find the thing that is easiest for you to love, like a small flower, a tree, an animal, or a work of art. Then simply sit with it and give it your precious love. After doing so a number of times, see if you can extend a bit of that precious love of yours to yourself. Anyone having such a precious gift as that love of yours is certainly worth loving.
Right? So if you love yourself, you can love other things, right? But most of the time, we don't love ourselves. We actually, many people hate themselves because they don't like what they see most of the time. Why? Because they're not in gratitude, they're not in acceptance, they're not really acknowledging what they really have because they've taken it for granted, right? So when we start loving something else, we focus our attention and our love in that, we can bounce that energy back to ourselves.
Another exercise is to sit in front of the mirror for 10 minutes and love that person that you see there. Do not be critical of her. We are all so good at looking in the mirror and finding every little flaw. That is not allowed here. Only positive compliments are allowed in this exercise. If you want a real challenge, every time you criticize yourself, start all over. See if you can make it to 10 minutes without one criticism.
So again, as I mentioned before, we are our biggest critic. We need to stop criticizing ourselves and appreciating ourselves much more. It's not easy to keep appreciating ourselves. Society doesn't look at it in that way, right? So we have to break out of these boundaries that have been created by society.
Faith. As I look back on it, after the completion of that 6-year period, great changes had taken place within me. A great deal of the time, I was aligned with a strong faith in the benign abundance of the universe. You can do this too by constantly trying to let go of your demanding will, align it with divine will. To find the truth in any situation and to respond with love in that situation, you will develop faith. Faith in yourself, faith in spiritual law, faith in the unity of the universe, faith that whatever happens in your life could be a stepping stone to greater understanding, love, and growth, and ultimately self purification towards the light of God.
This is also wonderful. In the book that we read, The Shift, right? He says over here, we need to shift from entitlement to humility, from control to trust, from attachment to letting go, right? Now, this is exactly what is being said over here. We need to trust the flow. We need to trust that whatever is coming into our lives is for our greater good. It is coming into our life for because we wanted it to come into our life. Having said that, in the previous chapters, we also discussed that we choose our parents. Where are we going to be born? What are we going to experience? We actually plan for all these experiences. So anything that is coming into our lives, the universe is providing it into our lives. It means that it is for our growth. The moment we start accepting that, the fighting drops, the small will, the ego will drops, and you start accepting whatever is coming into your life. Right? And that's when the magic starts to happen.
Faith means carrying on with your truth when all the outer signs that come to you tell you that it couldn't possibly be true. But deep inside, you know it is. This does not mean blind belief. It means to keep aligned with your intent, to become aware of and follow through with the truth and love as best you can, even though you feel terrible.
The small ego mind does not know the big picture, right? So many times what is happening and what you want to happen, you will not believe it. The little ego mind does not understand that it is possible, right? But when we align ourselves to the divine will, then anything is possible. And the moment that faith, that trust, that love starts to flow into your life, you will find that things will simply start happening. You don't have to make them happen, right? You will shift from effortfulness to effortlessness. It's a very powerful shift and it just happens. You have to let go of this small guy.
When he was on the cross, Christ had the faith to acknowledge that he no longer felt his faith. He exclaimed, "Father, why hast thou forsaken me?" He was being meticulously honest with himself. In that moment, he had lost his faith. He did not hide this fact or try to change it into something else. He loved himself by honestly expressing his dilemma. Later, he regained his stated, "Father, into your hands I commit my soul."
So again, wavering will be there, up and down will be there. We have to acknowledge it and then move ahead, right? Whenever we put up a facade, we immediately go into a control drama, which is not really acceptable when you're going towards the light.
I have seen that people of a spiritual path go through stages of faith. At first, they begin to learn the connections of cause and effect. They find that a positive belief and a positive actions bring positive rewards. Their dreams begin to be fulfilled. They begin establishing faith within themselves. It works. They exclaim with delight. However, after a while, they are ready to test their faith from a deeper level. They are probably not aware of this inner decision to test themselves because that would change the nature of the test. What happens? All outer verification of the process of positive cause and effect seem to disappear from life for a while. Things start going wrong, the positive feedback wanes, and the person begins to waver. The old pessimism rears its ugly head. Where is spiritual law? Perhaps it was a Pollyannish view of the universe after all. This will probably happen to you too.
So again, when we start getting into this field, right, you start noticing things. You will start having an effect, right? And the ego mind will start, telling you that you can make something happen, because if you do something in X way, this is what will happen. And then you make that equation. But ultimately, then ego sets in that if I say something, this will happen, right? And that's when the wavering, that's when the deepening or the release of the cause and effect starts to happen, because you're operating from a smaller state of consciousness. You're operating when we look at the map of consciousness, you get into pride, that ego starts to kick in. And that's when everything starts to go wrong. You'll start falling sick, or something will not happen the way that you want it. All those things, you have to be very watchful of the ego when we are getting into these states of consciousness. The ego will always take you off into a different path than what is the main path, that inner state of consciousness that we are wanting to touch. So be aware of the ego coming in when things start happening around you. This also happens. Richa, you want to say something?
I just wanted to say, could you explain it again? I just, when you go to higher states of consciousness,
yeah. So in the beginning,
the ego sets in. How does that
so
work?
I'll tell you, when you start, for example, right now you've done the excursion workshop. Okay. Now you've started using the reball. And you find that when you use the reball, things start happening. Right? Richa, are you there? Richa, are you there?
I was muted actually. Now I'm there.
Okay, so now you start using the reball and things start happening. So cause and effect.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Using
Right.
the reball and things start happening. Now
Right.
slowly what will start happening is that you start developing an ego, that if anything is wrong, I will put a reball and it will start working.
Yes, yes.
Got that? And
Yeah.
when you start doing that, you will find the reball will stop working.
Oh,
You get that? Why?
Yeah.
Because now you're not connecting with that higher state of consciousness. You are connecting with your ego self, and the ego is sending the reball. You're not shifting your state of consciousness and then sending the reball. So you've gone into this cause and effect bit, what he's talking over here. And then you have to reconnect. You have to drop the ego and reconnect with the divine will.
okay.
The ego
So
is not working anymore.
okay, so how do you reconnect with the divine will? That as in
By understanding that it is not me who's doing it, it's someone else who's doing it. It's a higher state or a bigger state of consciousness that's doing it. It's not the Niket Khaitan ego self which is actually doing anything, or the Richa ego self which is not doing anything. Okay, this is that spiritual ego, or that spiritual pride that comes in, which is very bad, in the sense that you have to be constantly making yourself aware of it, right?
And that's why the sickness comes in. That's what you said.
Exactly, that's why sickness comes in. Okay, this is the reason why I've seen it. I've experienced this, right? I got malaria 6 times in 1 year, because everything I started doing, and I was going into those spiritual highs, and everything started working. Then the ego self kicked in, and I got malaria 6 times in 1 year. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
When this happens in your life, it is a sign of greater growth. You begin to deal with much longer term cause and effect, both in your own life and ultimately in your own life as part evolution of the human race. The reward for living in truth becomes the pleasure of life in each moment you live it. No waiting for the spiritual goodie. You are receiving it right now. Being in the here and now means accepting the slow process of human evolution, accepting your immediate limitations as perfection.
So then once you cross that, when you transcend that, that ego driven thing, then what happens is that you go into a deeper state of consciousness. You go into a deeper state of awareness, right? Where you start accepting, you start realizing that whatever is happening for the greater good. You stop fighting, you start letting go, you start allowing, and that's when the real shift starts to happen. So you're not waiting for something to happen. Whatever is happening is your good, is your goodie. So what she's talking about here is that the prize, right? Acceptance of whatever is with gratitude, appreciation, and love is what the actual goodie is. So enjoying every moment as it is occurring. So you start living more in the present, more in the now, less in the future and in the past.
Dealing with time. Faith helped me deal with something I have always had trouble with, doing things in time. I once asked my mom what was the thing she remembered me having the most trouble with when I was growing up. She said, whenever you wanted something, you had to have it right away.
So again, this is a problem with our generation. We have provided our children with everything whenever they wanted it, right? Delay of gratification is not something that we have inculcated in our children, and it's a huge problem today. So she's having the same issue.
In these past few years, I have been learning patience. I am finally beginning to understand what it is about for me. Here is a thought that may work for you too. Having patience is a direct statement of faith in the divine plan.
Now, this is very important, right? We must get the thing that we need at the right time. But when we are looking at something from the small guy, the small ego, then we don't have the bigger picture, right? So we really don't know when is the right time to get something. And the ego wants it immediately. That is where we go wrong. So patience and an ability to delay gratification is extremely important. That trust, that faith that we will get it when the time is right.
It is the acceptance that everything is right for you as it is now. You have created it this way. It means also that you can change what exists now through your own efforts of transformation. Impatience ultimately means that you do not believe that you can create what you want. It means lack of faith in the self and the divine plan.
Now, this is again very beautiful, right? When you are impatient, you have lost trust. You've gone into effortfulness from effortlessness, right? You've lost your balance. You've lost your equanimity. You've lost your homeostasis, your body system, your mind, your emotional system, and your mental system is going out of track. When we can come back and coordinate with the divine will and have patience, allow things to happen, then again the magic starts to slowly unfold in your life. But that patience is very important.
It takes time to manifest what you wish on the physical plane. To help me accept that reality, I developed the following affirmation. I want to honor my commitment to being on the physical plane by honoring the time that it takes to accomplish things here. The apparent slowness between cause and effect that is built into this plane is here for a reason. We need to be able to see clearly the cause and effect connections in relationships that we do not understand. These relationships are ultimately between parts of ourselves that are not yet unified.
So again, when we are going into altered states of consciousness, into the higher focus levels, we always say that you're going into will responsive universes, right? That if you will it, or if you say it, or thought responsive universes, you're thinking and it will manifest. Over here, if you think, there is a slight delay. Okay, although this universe that we live in, this 3D environment, is also thought responsive to a certain extent. I think of raising my hand and boom, my hand raises. So what is that? That is operating in a thought responsive universe, right? But over there, it is very powerful. It happens like that. But if we can operate in this state of, in this earth life existence, in a higher state of consciousness, then whatever we think will manifest here also. Although for the general public, there is a delay between thought and something manifesting. And this is something that we need to learn, right? Because if we go into a thought responsive universe, let me tell you, I would not like to be with myself, because we don't have clarity of thought. And everything we think about, if it starts to manifest, think about what will happen over there. There was this one movie, I forget, this guy was given a remote control and he was allowed to manifest the thoughts of any person, whatever they wanted. And it led to total chaos, because most of the time we really don't want what we really want, because we don't have any clarity of mind, right? So it becomes very important for us to observe our mind, be aware of what we are thinking, what are we really asking for, and what are we really wanting when we want things to manifest.
Power. At one point in my training in healing, I had a sudden increase in the power flowing through my hands. It came with what appeared to me to be a new set of guides. I was working on a person's infected toe. I would hold my hands a certain way, which would send very strong blue silver light streaking through the toe. My hands were about 1 inch away from the toe. The patient would cry out in pain when I did this because of the increased energy flow. When I moved my hands differently, I could make a soft, white, cloudy energy come out of my hands. This would take all the pain away. The guides kept directing me to switch between the two. I was tired, and every 15 minutes or so, the guides directed me to go to work on this woman. There seemed to be an urgency about it. The results of the little healings were powerful. No infection and no need to operate. I was ecstatic and told my healing teacher, I said, see, there was so much power flowing through me. Her answer was, well, that is it. Do you want to heal with love or with power?
So this is so important, right? Where are we operating from? This is a question that we need to keep asking ourselves. Are we operating from love or are we operating from power, right? So the point here is, again, if you look at power versus force, over here, it would be basically love would be power and power over here would be force. So when we are operating from force, right, or in this case over here, power, it would imply that we are operating from the ego self, right? Rather than allowing love to heal, we are operating from the power.
I decided I was not ready to have that much power flowing through me. I enjoyed it too much in a wow, look at me kind of way. I sent the guides away. I didn't work with them until 2 years later. Then I was ready. I had learned a great deal more about love. Later, I understood that it was the spiritual surgeons from the 5th level who were working with me.
So again, she realized that her ego is coming into the picture and she actually avoided it till she had grown more so that she could handle that amount of power.
Faith based on truth, divine will, and love brings power. Power that stems from deep within the individual, from the divine spark within. Power is the result of aligning with, connecting to, and allowing the divine spark of life within to flow. It comes from the core of the individual, or what my guide here calls the Holy of Holies. Having power means to be seated within the center of one's being.
All growth, everything emits from a center. Everything around us has a center. And in the center, you have something called, when we look at it from the biogeometry perspective, the energy called BG3 energy, which is the sacred energy, which is the energy of creation. Any space, like when a lady is pregnant, it is literally, when you look at it dynamically, it's very difficult for a baby to carry the baby in the womb, right? But the baby still the lady still carries the baby, because BG3, that entire space becomes a sacred space. So when we can start connecting to our center, we start operating and becoming a sacred space where all manifestation can start taking place. We are aligning ourselves to the divine will.
Power brings you the ability to be in and to practice unconditional love. This means returning all that comes to you with love without betraying the self. You can only do this by loving yourself first and being in truth. That means being honest with yourself as to what you feel and committing yourself to move through that place to another place of loving.
So again, when we read this book, the 4 agreements, right? The first tenet was be impeccable with your word. What does that imply? It doesn't only mean that be truthful to anything outside you. It also means, and I think it means more, be truthful to yourself. Because if you're not being impeccable with your word with yourself, how can you be impeccable with your word with anyone else?
You see, if you deny the negative reactions you have by pushing them down, you are not loving yourself or others. If you feel and acknowledge them in some way, you then make room for your love to flow. You release yourself to move to a loving place inside. Unconditional love allows the action of grace in our lives.
So again, you have to accept yourself for whatever you are. You have to become aware of what you are. The moment we start accepting ourselves, accepting our flaws, most of the time we reject our flaws, right? So we don't want to take responsibility for them. When we start taking responsibility for our flaws and accepting them, we allow for change to come in our life. We allow for growth to come into our life. And that's extremely important.
Grace, with of truth, divine will, and love, leading to faith, which leads to power, we make room for the action of grace to come into our life. Grace is received by letting go to divine wisdom and is experienced as bliss. It is experiencing the unity in all things and our complete safety, no matter what happens. It is the state of knowing that every experience we have, including pleasurable and painful experiences like illness and death, are simply lessons we create for ourselves along the pathway back home to God. It is living in synchronicity.
So basically, what is happening? We are allowing the flow into our life. We are allowing grace into our life. We are accepting of whatever is, and then we can also find that the universe responds to our arzis, our requests. Why? Because grace has now come into our life.
Emmanuel said, the state of grace needs the recipient in order to be complete. You are held in the hand of God and totally loved. And when that love can be received, the circuit is completed. Who is healed? The healer must remember that it is the healing of the soul that we are working for. It is important for healers to understand death in this way and to treat the whole person, not just this incarnation of the person. The healer must not give up healing someone simply because he may be physically dying.
So again, we exist in multiverses at the same time, right? So we never know where the connection is being made.
It is important to keep two things in mind when we are trying to understand just what we are doing as healers. One is that there is a deep meaning in each person's experience of his illness. And two is that death does not imply failure, but probably healing. In order to remember this, the healer must live in two worlds, the spiritual and the physical. It is
So again, death is never the end. Okay, it's just a continuum. And when we are going into these expanded states, we actually figure out that everything is happening at the same time, right? So there's no distinction. There is no past life or future life. It's all happening now. It's the options that are there, which are available, which are manifesting. Where we focus our attention, that is where we will be.
It is only by being centered within herself and the universe that she can go through the experience of continually witnessing the deep pain that is so widespread in humanity. I asked my friend Emmanuel about this with the following question. If we create our illness, isn't going to a healer a way to distract us from working on ourselves, working on the source of the disease? Emmanuel said, that all depends on why you go to the healer and which healer you go to. That is an excellent question, and one, may I dare say, that our healer has asked herself a lot. What is the responsibility and, therefore, what is to be given and what is to be received? And envisioned, is it to be said? The questions never end. And yet, there is a basic fundamental reality that should give you comfort. When there is the moment of realization that perhaps there is another mode of healing, then already a door has been opened. Already the consciousness has reached beyond the physically manifested, available medical care.
So basically, again, this is a question, right? That if you're suffering something you're meant to suffer, so whether you should go to a healer or not, right? Now, everything is meant to happen. You're meant to go to the healer also. So just accept it at that. But what is the state of consciousness with which you're going to the healer will again is the real thing that we must actually focus on. Are we going to the healer from the left side of the grid or the right side of the grid? Which level of consciousness on the consciousness map are we going to the healer with, right? Are we going in pain? Are we going in fear? Are we going in acceptance? Are we going in understanding? Now, there's a very big difference in the way that we are approaching the healer and how the healer is also approaching us. That can make a lot of difference in the entire game.
Now, I am not in any way degrading the medical profession. Doctors do excellent work. Some are most guided and would be free to admit it to you behind closed doors. There are others who, whether they be in the medical profession or another form of making a living, simply are not aware and are not at this point able to be aware. This does not mean that they are mean, cruel, vicious, or evil. It simply means that they have yet to come into the area of knowing. It behooves you to be willing to bless them and go on your way and find someone who feels more compatible with your consciousness. And you all know how to do that. When you find the calling to move into the area of spiritual healing, I do not say psychic healing, I say spiritual healing. Then there is the awareness of spirit, and you are welcomed by the healer and the spirits who are there to work with that healer.
So what she's saying is when you shift, right, you start accepting that there is a different way of healing from a higher state of consciousness. The shift is already taking place in you. Now, psychic healing is these psychic doctors, who do operations and all that stuff. So she's making a distinction between that psychic healing and the spiritual healing.
Now, often there is not the healing that is expected. Often there is perhaps identification and easing of discomfort, but no miracle. Well, what does that mean? It means that is as far as your consciousness will go at that point. It means that there is something else to learn. There is something else to know. For every physical body is a schoolroom, and every disease is a lesson. Not in a punitive way, for you have written your own text.
Right. So every disease, everything that happens to us in life, there is a lesson in that experience. The moment we start approaching life like that, then again the shifts will start taking place in our lives.
Not in a punitive way, for you have written your own text. You have chosen your own bodies that carry with them all of the weaknesses that, yes, may be said are genetic because your grandmother or grandfather had something. But remember, you chose them as well. So you need to trust your body not only in illness, but especially in illness for what is it saying to you. There are many ways of hearing this, and a qualified spiritual healer can be most effective there to help you hear what it is that your body is saying to you. Certainly, you are the one who is able best to understand it, for it is within your language that your body has been formed, and it is to you directly that it is speaking. But a spiritual healer can alter that consciousness to the oneness again and can bring you into alignment with the truth. Whether you are able to sustain that truth or whether you are able to heal an ailing body at that moment depends on so many factors that I could not even begin to enumerate them now. But you, yourselves, are perfectly capable of doing that. If there is, ultimately, what in your human terms is a failure, if someone would, heaven forbid, then you must see it all as a blessed event. That soul has completed its task, and there is a great and joyous welcoming committee greeting it in the primary reality. After all,
Yeah. So what she's very clearly saying is that when we get ill, right, we need to focus on what is the lesson that illness is bringing into our life rather than fighting it. Once we understand that, then healing will take place at a deeper level, not only at a physical level, but at a deeper level also.
after all, your physical being was not meant to be infinite. You are not here to sit in these clothes forever. I hope that pleases you. Therefore, there are no failures in spiritual healing. There are only steps. Never be afraid to put your hand on another with love and compassion. Never hesitate to pray for someone. Do not demand results, for there is no way of knowing for sure what a particular soul requires. I understand that this demands or seems to demand an incredible amount of faith. Yes, it does.
So basically, when we say win-win, may the best manifest when we are sending the reball, this is exactly what she's saying. pray for that person, but trust the universe to manifest whatever is required.
As the body and mind become more purified through the transformative processes described in this book, the amount of power flowing through the healer increases, and so does the range of vibrations. The higher the power, the more effective the healing, and the more sensitive the healer.
So again, as you raise your vibratory frequency, naturally you're able to connect to a wider range that is allowing you to heal stuff from a different state altogether.
Each time I have been given new insight and power, this insight came after a self-initiated test. To go through such tests, one must be meticulously honest with the self. It is in the little self-delusions where we tend to avoid looking at our own lower self's intent or actions that we betray our integrity and decrease our power from within.
So again, the same thing that I've been constantly saying, where are we operating from? What is our intent? Where do we wish to actually go? What is it that we really want? That is what ultimately determines whatever is happening around us.
Each test is related to whatever issues we are dealing with in our lives at the present time. We design our tests well so that when we have learned, there is no question about graduation.
So since we have created this life, we have created our tests also. So whatever we are experiencing in life, we are the ones who have determined that this is what we want to experience.
Exercises to find your readiness to be a healer. How truthful am I? How well do I use my will in alignment with the universal will? How do I use power? How well do I love? Can I give unconditional love? Do I respect the authority of those to whom I have chosen to give authority in order to learn from them? Can I do this without selling out my own inner authority? How do I betray my integrity? What is it that I long for? What do I wish to create in my life? What are my limitations as a woman, as a man, as a human being, as a healer? Do I respect the integrity, the personal path, the will, and the choices of my patients? Do I see myself as a channel that evokes the power from within the patient so that they are healing themselves ultimately? What is my personal stake in having someone get well? Do I see death as a failure?
So basically, it's all about integrity. How are we looking at what we are doing? Where are we operating from? Again, where is our intent? Where do we want to go? Where do we want to be? Right? This is what is very important.
It's nearly 3.
There's one paragraph.
Exercise to consider the nature of healing. What is a healer? What is a healing? What is the main purpose of a healing? What is giving a healing? Who heals? Who is healed? Heon has recently said, "Now, dear reader, do not set judgment upon yourself from the above questions. We are all walking a path of purification, and love is the most healing agent of all. Do not reject yourself, saying you can never do all of this. You can and you will. It is simply a matter of accepting where and who you are now as perfect in your imperfections. We of the spirit world hold you in great honor and respect. You have chosen to become physical beings as a great gift, not only to yourselves, but to the physically manifest universe as well.
So again, this is something when we are going into higher states, and especially people who've had near-death experiences, the value of the experiences that we are having in this world, in this physical universe, is very valued over there, because this is a compressed learning kind of a school, right? So there's a lot of value in what we are experiencing and doing over here.
Your personal changes towards health and wholeness affect those around you, not only those within your immediacy, but all those sentient beings upon the face of the earth. Indeed, the earth herself. You are all children of the earth.
So this is something we read in Power versus Force also. One person operating in that above 700 level can look after millions of people and raise the consciousness level of the entire planet. So as all of us are raising our levels of consciousness, we are raising the consciousness level of entire humanity.
You are of her, she is of you. Never forget that, for as we move more and more into planetary consciousness in the near future, you will become leaders of this great adventure into the light. Above all, love and honor yourselves as we honor you. After all, we are in the presence of the divine. When we are with you, you are fully held in the arms of God and loved. Know this, and you shall be home free.
So we are also divine. They are also divine. It's just that we don't know that we are divine. That's why she's saying, Hyon is saying that when we are in your presence, we are in the presence of the divine, right? So, and that is that spark, that is that inner connection that we are really wanting to make at the end of the day.
When you understand that life is experienced as a pulsation, you expand and feel joyous. You move into the silence of peace and then you contract. Many people experience that contraction as negative. Many of you will experience wondrous joy, like being in the company of angels during a workshop or a healing. So will the patient. But remember, by the very nature of the expanded high energy state, you will later contract and feel more of the separated consciousness that is inside of you.
So this is again very true, right? There's always a wave. So you'll grow and then you'll fall back. Then again, you'll grow and then again, you'll fall back. So I call it, you grow and then you come to a plateau state. That plateau state is very important, because if you don't integrate in the plateau state, you'll fall down, right? But ultimately, we need to see a graph that is going up. You're expanding, then you'll contract. Then again, you'll expand a little more. Then again, you'll contract. Then again, you'll expand. So this wavering is there in all spiritual growth.
The sheer force and intensity of the spiritual energy knocks loose and begins to enlighten the stagnated dark soul substance. As it comes back to life again, you experience it as real. All of its pain, anger, and agony, you may say to yourself, why now I'm worse than I was before I started? Let me assure you that this is not true. You are more sensitive. After experiencing these ups and downs, these expansions and contractions, many times for each personal issue, you will find that they do clear away. Months later, you will say, wow, I don't do that anymore. You will weep with joy just as you did the first several times you came back into and experienced the light. Remember, patience is the word of faith.
Okay, we can stop.